Hello and welcome to the Teacher Talks podcast. My name is Vin, and today we have Mr. Raffauf. And so, for my first question is, what do you teach?
Yeah, so thanks for having me. I really like this idea. It's pretty cool. I watched the episode with Mr. Cooper. That was incredible. Um, so I teach this year. I teach anatomy and physiology. It's an elective course, and I also have one honors chem section. Um, I've taught a bunch of other courses in the past, but that's what I have this year. So I have 5 anatomies and 1 honors chem.
So, how long have you been teaching?
So actually, just a couple of weeks ago, it was 14 years that I've been teaching, all of them at Wilson. I'm one of those that I started in the middle of the year. So I actually was in for Mrs. Ryan, who's now at West. It's a long time ago. So I came in at Central. It was Central Junior High. And Mrs. Ryan went out on maternity leave. And I was her long-term sub the second half of the year. And then while I was there, one of the science teachers at the high school retired that spring, and I was fortunate enough to get the job up at the high school for the following year. So that half year plus those, so I started in January, so just hit that 14-year mark, which is hard to believe. That's been 14 years. Yeah, well, that was before like any of my students were in school, and closing in on getting like before some students were born, which is really hard for me to wrap my head around.
Yeah.
So,
do you have any funny, crazy stories like from teaching?
oh man, some of the stories just happen like in the day-to-day stuff. Like the funniest stories are from some of the times where, like, a kid may say something unexpectedly or just something happens. I remember one time, I'm not going to say the kid's name, but he's telling a story to his friends, but the classroom's quiet, and he tells a story, and he's laughing really hard through the story because it's something that happened to him in middle school, and he looks up at the end, and I'm crying. I'm laughing so hard because I heard the whole story. Most of the class heard the whole story, and he was telling his own story. So like it wasn't like he was, someone else was telling it, but it was so funny. And I was laughing so hard, I'm crying. And it was just one of those things that looking back on it. And so I had him in 2 different classes actually. So like I ended up having him again, and it was fun. And like those interactions with the kids, that's one of the things that I really, a lot of the humor comes from that. Or me doing stuff like, that makes myself what happens to me funny. So like my first day teaching at the high school, my first day, I fell out of my chair. I went to sit down, I hit the edge, it shot out, and I fell down. It was in the room that Mr. Small is in right now. So they have like those science teacher, they have those science demo tables in the front. So I like fell out of sight to the class, and it's just dead silent. I feel like if it would have happened later in the year, they would have laughed immediately. But the first day, no one really knew what to take of it because I just like disappeared. But yeah, I fell out of my chair on the first day, and like I was horrified, but like, what are you gonna do? So I laughed, and then they kind of broke the ice and they laughed too. But stuff like that happens, but a lot of it's in the moment that it's really funny.
So do you run any clubs at the school?
Yeah, I help with the Medical Leaders of Tomorrow Club. Mrs. Petrius helps with that as well. But basically, we just try to give kids exposure to different things in the medical field. We have guest speakers come in and talk about things. And then, it gives kids another chance to kind of organize and go through those types of things with the club. I think a lot of kids have awesome ideas, right? But like when they get into the spots, and I feel like Minithon is a good example of this too, where kids, they get all these big ideas, putting them into motion, takes a lot of work. And so, all the clubs, including Medical Leaders of Tomorrow, like they getting those clubs up and running and getting those ideas and putting plans into action, it's just great experience for students to have a chance to actually work with that, like getting the ideas, ironing out the plans, working out schedules, getting people lined up to come in, like all of those things that go into it, just kind of getting firsthand experience with that. At the same time, they get to be exposed to things that maybe they weren't exposed to before. Like I know last year we had a medical examiner come in, or pathologist who works in a medical examiner's office. Like it's a unique experience. Most people, I get a lot of kids in anatomy that are like, I want to be a doctor, or I want to be a nurse, but like they don't necessarily know the specifics, and that's fine. You're in high school, you don't need to know the specifics yet, but like working that out and trying to figure out, here are some options, and maybe things that they don't even know about or haven't been exposed to before. All of those things I look at. The club is a great opportunity to kind of provide those opportunities. So it's a lot of fun.
So does it help with the kid's resume when applying to colleges?
Yeah, I think on two fronts. Like one, it's a good way to kind of like build connections. One time I had a student come in, and he was studying to be, well, actually he's going for his PhD now in like marine biology. So not really strongly related to anatomy.
Yeah.
But he was coming in to speak to some of Mr. Dom's classes. He's one of my former students. And I think he was going to speak to the AP Bio and the AP Environmental. But like he was like, I'm going to be in. Do you want me to stop down for the period in between? I'm like, yeah, sure. So he came down and he just talked a lot about how even through college, he didn't know, he went for neuroscience. Well, he liked it, but it wasn't really his thing. And then he kind of wound his way through opportunities. And next thing you know, he's in a doctorate program, and working on his PhD, and he just said he never would have imagined that's the path he took, but things kind of presented themselves and opportunities arose, and he ended up in this great opportunity. And I try to emphasize situations like that happen. His is kind of an extreme example, but lots of things happen where you don't necessarily know how it's going to work out. But if you take advantage of the opportunities, lots of times good things work out, even if it's not exactly how you have it planned.
Yeah. So straying away from the school questions, do you have any interests outside of school?
Yeah. So a big one would be my family. I'm married. My wife and I have been married 10 years. And we have 2 sons. And so that occupies a lot of our time. They just keep you busy. But that's a lot of fun. As my kids get older, they're getting more active in things. So it's very different. I'm also really, really into sports. And it's not, so I love watching sports. I like playing sports, but I'm not that good, and I'm getting old. So that's not so much into I don't play super competitively, but a lot of times now I go out and play, throwing baseball with my kid or shooting basketball with my kid, things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, sports are a big part of what I like to do in my spare time. So whenever an opportunity comes up to do something sports related, if I can, I usually jump on it.
Do you think any of your kids would be interested in the stuff you do at school?
So I kind of am of the mindset, and I talked to, my wife and I had talked about this before we had kids, and even as we have kids, if they're interested in the things I'm interested in, that's awesome. That's cool. But if not, that's fine too. But they gotta be doing something. They're not just gonna, now they're a little young for that aspect of it yet. But my older son, he's really into sports right now, but he'll watching them, but he mostly wants to play. He wants to play things, and that's fine too. He loves that stuff. My younger son's too young for that stuff. He's only 3, so he just runs around like a maniac. So
do you like to pursue anything outside of your career?
Honestly, right now, not a whole lot. Like, I have teaching, and the responsibilities that go with that. And I kind of just like things related to my family. And that I kind of just like, I don't want to say focus, but that's kind of my focal point right now are those things, and just trying to make sure, like, all right, my son, he played soccer, and then he wanted to try baseball, and then he has played basketball, and that, like, just kind of, he wants to play baseball again this spring. So like just different things as they come up, just trying to wrap my head around, okay, how are we going to make the scheduling work, all that stuff. But you know what, that's the stuff he likes doing. And so like, that's kind of where I'm drawn to enjoying those things too now, like going to see him play, see him practice, stuff like that.
Do you have any favorite music you like to listen to?
Yeah, so I'll listen to lots of different stuff. And it's kind of all over the place. I'd say like my favorite group is probably the Avett Brothers, and they're a little older. But like they're my favorite group. And I just got tickets to see them this summer out in Colorado. So
that's gonna be nice.
Yeah, I'm really excited. Yeah, they for many years now, they've played 3 nights at a venue called Red Rocks out in Morrison, Colorado, outside of Denver, like up in the mountains. It's incredible. And I got to see them a few years ago play there, and so worked it out. It helps. My sister lives in Colorado, so like we'll visit her, and
that's nice.
Well, yeah, they'll go with us to the concert and everything. But like I'm really excited because they're my favorite group, and it's my favorite place I've ever seen a concert. So like to get the opportunity to maybe go back and do that again I'm pretty excited about that. But I'll listen to pretty much anything and everything. Obviously some things I like more than others, but yeah.
Do you have a favorite movie or TV show?
So TV show, I'm kind of all over the place. My wife laughs because again, she's like, "You're just getting old." Like I'll watch so many like Netflix documentaries, like or things like that. Most of what I watch on TV is either sports related or any show relating to like Alaska. So like, the ones where they're like, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about some of the different shows, but basically the Alaska shows or sports is pretty much what I'm watching. And like, I've never been to Alaska. I don't really hunt or fish, but like, I'm just drawn to those shows. I don't know why, but, and then like I said, lots of documentaries on Netflix and stuff like that.
Yeah. Do you have like a fun fact about Alaska?
I don't even know. But do you have a fun fact about Alaska?
I don't know.
Oh, I thought you were going to have one. I thought you were going to have one to throw at me. But no, I'd love to get there someday. But yeah, I know like some people are like, wait, what? Like, but it's just, I don't know. It would be really cool. I think I know a lot of people know it's like the largest state, but just I think people don't realize how big it really is and how far it stretches out and all of those things. So I'd love to get there someday. And again, I don't hunt. I don't really fish. I've gone fishing, but yeah, it'd be a cool place to visit. Something different. Yeah.
Well, thinking back to like middle school or high school, what did you want to do originally before this?
All right. So when I was in middle school and high school, probably high school, I started to think like I wanted to do physical therapy. Like I wanted to be a physical therapist. And so when I went to college, that was my mindset. Like I was going to be a physical therapist, and I went to Duquesne out in Pittsburgh, and it was so I was a biology major on that track. And then through different experiences, including like the one summer I stayed out there and worked like in a hospital, not as a physical therapist, but like on my way, and I liked it. But it just was one of those things where like I started to realize like maybe it's not what I wanted to do for my career, for like the long term. Like I liked it, but it just, I don't know, it just didn't feel right. And it's hard to explain because it's what I thought I wanted to do for a long time. But I was starting to see like maybe that's just not right. I don't know. It was
Yeah.
really hard to explain. It was difficult to like come to that realization too, because
Mhm.
like that's what I had in mind. Like that's what I wanted to do. That's what I was going to school for. That's the path I was taking. Um, so I finished with my biology degree there, and then I'm like, man, what am I gonna do? I thought about teaching. I thought about lots of different things. Um, I considered like trying to go. Like literally, I looked up the details and started to like make a plan as one of my options to like move to Florida to go to umpire school to try and be a baseball umpire, like a
Oh.
professional baseball umpire. Um, but like so like nothing was off the table. Like
Yeah.
I didn't know what I was going to do next, and I went and started taking some classes for teaching at Kutztown.
Mhm.
And I started liking it, and then also like started realizing like really quickly like, hey, I think this might be for me. And then once you start teaching, like obviously it has its ups and downs, but I'm
Yeah.
like, man, like this is absolutely for me. And it's a perfect example. I think I mentioned earlier, like you never know how things are gonna like kind of work out, how
Mhm.
the opportunities might present themselves. And that's absolutely how I feel about teaching. Like I didn't know if I was gonna like it or not like it. I didn't know, any of that stuff. But like looking back at how it's worked out, I absolutely love it, and I'm glad I made the decisions I made.
Yeah. So, did you have what was your first job?
All right, so my first job was probably just like cutting grass, right?
Oh.
Like mowing grass at a couple different places in the town where I live. But like my first real job, like where I was getting, a paycheck and not
Yeah.
just like people paying you, was I worked for a supply company. So a medical supply company that's actually based out of West Reading now, CNS Medical Supply, and it started out with Al Wicks owns that company, and he lived up the street from my parents. And I was 16, and they were doing a project where they were cleaning out a warehouse, and he needed some help. So he's like, "God, do you want to help for the day?" So I go. My parents are like, "You're going." So I go and I help out, like literally like pressure washing floors in a warehouse and just cleaning. Um, and then they're like, "Hey, we could use some help this summer." So I just stayed on. And then I worked there doing lots of different stuff. Mr. Wicks likes to bring up the point that like I should pay him for all the things I learned when I worked there. And it's a joke, but I did learn a lot working there. I worked in the warehouse, so inventory, moving things around, like all kinds of stuff. I worked as a delivery guy. I worked on like almost like a moving company. We would move doctor's offices.
Mhm.
I worked like furniture installation, like building office furniture and installing it, or like installing things in doctor's offices. Like I learned a lot at that job, and it was a great experience. And it like I worked there basically in the summers and on breaks,
Mhm.
starting from between my junior and senior year of high school until I started student teaching.
Mm.
So yeah, so when I was 16 till I was like 22 or 23, I worked there. That was the only other real job I've had other than teaching. So yeah, I worked there, and I learned a lot.
Did you think that was gonna be your job?
So I knew that it probably wasn't for me.
Mm.
It was while it was a good job, um, I knew that I there were aspects of it that were really hard,
Mhm.
like really hard. Like I just think about like unloading some of the trucks in the summertime, and you're just
Yeah.
sweating like crazy, like some of those things. Um, and looking at the side of things like, oh, well, there's opportunities for sales and things like that. Not really my personality,
Mhm.
to like go out and like, I think about like cold calling, like showing up at a place that doesn't necessarily know you're coming to sell them stuff, like there are people that do it and there are people who are really good at it. And I don't think that would be my strong suit. So
Mm.
like, but getting lots of experiences, it helps like broaden your horizons. I got to meet a lot of people. And all of those things like help as you kind of move through things. And again, it kind of gave me an idea of like, all right, it was a really good like job for me.
Yeah.
But I also knew that like it wasn't what I wanted to do long term. You know what I mean? So like, but you know what? Again, it's one of those experiences. And I talked about that with the students. You learn things, and sometimes you're like, oh, this is what I want to do. And sometimes you're like, this isn't what I want to do. And you learn best from those experiences, you know? My wife jokes because pretty much we go a lot of different places, and I'm like, oh, I've been here before. I delivered there. And she's just like, how do you remember that? And I'm like, well, I had to really like, but yeah, I got to experience a lot, and it helped kind of direct me, you know, reinforce that like, I think I want to teach, you know, like, cause I was working towards that, and, you know, knew that like, I think that's I felt more drawn to that.
Yeah.
And so, again, just another kind of reinforcement of that.
Do you have like a kind of like good experience with it or a bad experience?
I would say I have a really good experience with it. I mean, it worked hard. You know, we worked really hard. I think of times where we would move doctor's offices. So we'd kind of work during the day, and then like we'd go and work basically overnight to move the doctor's office because they want to be able to stay open at their old location and at their new location, and moving like files. Now, again, that's different now, I would imagine, because a lot more things are done digitally, but like moving just rooms and rooms of like files, like it's so heavy. And just like that experience of working hard and seeing like what it's like for, you know, like at this point, like I can understand a lot of people's experiences if they're teachers, but like that's an experience I wouldn't have known, like how hard you're working to do that. Or like, not that you don't think people are working hard, but like just understanding, like I have a better understanding of other people's jobs. And again, it's limited. It's a few other jobs, but it gave me an experience to understand other people's jobs in a way that I wouldn't have that experience if I hadn't worked there.
Yeah. So for kind of a silly question, if you could have a superpower, what would it be and why?
I definitely think it would be to fly. Like I just think that would be super convenient. I've had people have asked me before, like, but what if you could only fly at the rate at which you could walk or run? I feel like that complicates it, but I'm still taking it because if you can go in a straight line somewhere, it's going to speed lots of things up.
Yeah.
I think, that's what I'm going with. I would go be able to fly. That's definitely the one I would choose.
So for the end of this, what would your advice be to students about anything?
The biggest advice I would give the students is that, like look for and say yes to the opportunities that present themselves. I know a lot of times people don't necessarily want to like leave their comfort zone and things like that. And listen, like that, I also am guilty of that. Like, you know, you get in a routine, you know this, and you don't want to do something different, but those opportunities, you never know where they're going to lead you.
Yeah.
So I mentioned, I went to Kutztown to get there were a couple classes I needed, and I needed to student teach. And my first day at Kutztown, a professor, Dr. Titus, I'll never forget. He just was like, he told his story, like he was in the Air Force and then he taught for the Department of Defense. And I'm like, man, that's a really cool story. And then he's like, I want to get it so that we can run we can have student teachers go to Department of Defense schools somewhere, like basically like study abroad, but you're student teaching. I'm like, he's like, is anyone interested? And I just raised my hand. Like, that sounds cool. Know nothing about it. My first class to go to be a teacher. I know nothing about teaching yet. So the next semester, at the beginning of the semester, he's like, he, you know, sends me an email or stops by and sees me in one of my classes. He's like, hey, I remember you raised your hand. Like, yeah, you know, but also like I wasn't the traditional path. I had my biology degree. I wasn't like, so I didn't really think that would work for me.
Yeah.
He's like, you should apply. I'm like, all right, you know, I'll apply. Dr. Titus was a great professor, really helped me out with just kind of like calming me down early on when I'm like, I don't know if I can do this. He's like, you'll be fine. So I applied, but I'm like, they just need people to apply. Well,
Yeah.
then come May, he's like, I get a call from him. He's like, hey, you were picked. Do you want to go to Puerto Rico in the fall? I'm like, yeah, I do. So like next thing you know, I'm living on a Coast Guard base, essentially, on the coast in Puerto Rico, like a block from the beach, doing my student teaching. It was an unbelievable experience. And I look at it all because on that first day, I was just like, that sounds cool. And I raised my hand, like, and then followed up. Like, there was nothing special about me as like a candidate for that. Like
Yeah.
I was just willing. Like that's basically what set me apart. I was willing to go. And so me and one other guy went down, and it was just an incredible experience. And like there are so many experiences like that, whether I've got to chaperone the trip to Jamaica with Mr. Doms. I've gotten to go twice, basically because he asked, and I was like, yeah, I would love to go, an amazing experience, like absolutely amazing experience. All because I'm like, I would love to go, and it doesn't necessarily mean now that it's always easy to go. I was so nervous to get on a plane, going to Puerto Rico, not knowing like who's gonna pick us up from the airport. Like, didn't know any of those things. Like, super anxious, but those things work out. And because I made myself available, you never know what opportunities are going to present themselves because of that. And so like the advice I would give would be like, say yes to those opportunities, like put yourself out there. You never know kind of where that's going to lead, but it leads to some awesome things sometimes. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't work out like you planned. Like I went to college in Pittsburgh thinking I was going to be a physical therapist. And then you start to learn more about yourself, and you start to realize maybe that's not it. But like, other opportunities will present. Just because the path you picked isn't the path you end up taking doesn't mean that you're not going to end up at some awesome destination. And so that would be my advice to kids. Like, don't worry about all the little details. Just in the moment, thinking about like Mr. Cooper's interview, where his advice was like to be in the moment. Like, don't wish your days away. Like, absolutely. And like, make the most of those experiences and opportunities, because you never know. Like, you just never know when you might not get that chance ever again. So make the most of the opportunities you have, and things work out.
Yeah. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you for having me. This was awesome. I really liked it.
This has been Teacher Talks with Mr. Raffauf, and thank you for joining us, and we'll see you next episode.